Wife faked a miscarriage to hide her affair. The hospital records I subpoenaed told a very different story. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was making coffee when my wife came downstairs, her face pale and drawn. She sat at the kitchen table and told me she needed to go to the hospital because she thought something was wrong with the pregnancy. We'd been trying for 2 years, and when we finally got pregnant 3 months ago, it felt like our whole world had opened up. The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, made my stomach drop. I drove her to the emergency room, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. She was quiet the whole way, staring out the window. When we got there, she asked me to wait in the lobby while she went in for the examination. Something about wanting privacy during such a personal moment. I sat in those uncomfortable plastic chairs for what felt like hours, watching other families come and go, some celebrating, others crying. The smell of disinfectant and the constant beeping of machines made everything feel surreal. When she came back out, her eyes were red and puffy. She collapsed into my arms and told me we had lost the baby. The doctor said it was a missed miscarriage, she explained, where the body doesn't immediately recognize the loss. She would need to have a procedure in a few days to complete the process. I held her while she cried, my own tears mixing with hers. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what felt like the end of everything we'd been hoping for. The next few days were a blur of grief and practical arrangements. She took time off work, and I rearranged my schedule to be home with her. Friends and family sent flowers and casseroles, the way people do when they don't know what else to offer. My mother-in-law came to stay for a week, bustling around the house and making sure we were eating. Everyone walked on eggshells, speaking in hushed tones about loss and healing and trying again when we were ready. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way she seemed to recover so quickly, or how she kept checking her phone even during our most intimate moments of grief. When I suggested we frame the ultrasound picture we'd been so excited about just weeks before, she said she'd thrown it away because it was too painful to look at. That struck me as odd because she'd been carrying it in her purse, showing it to everyone. 3 weeks after the supposed miscarriage, I found a receipt in her jeans pocket while doing laundry. It was from a pharmacy across town, dated the day before she went to the hospital. The items weren't itemized, just a total amount, but something about it nagged at me. She never went to that part of town, and we had a pharmacy right down the street from our house. When I asked her about it, she said she couldn't remember. Maybe she'd stopped there after visiting a friend. The friend's story didn't add up either. She mentioned visiting her college roommate who supposedly lived in that area, but I knew her roommate had moved to Oregon 2 years ago. We'd sent her a Christmas card. Little inconsistencies like that started piling up, creating a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. I began paying closer attention to her behavior, feeling guilty for doubting her during such a difficult time, but unable to ignore the growing sense that something was very wrong. A month later, I was cleaning out her car when I found a hotel key card tucked under the floor mat. The hotel was about 30 minutes away, in a business district where neither of us had any reason to be. When I confronted her about it, she said it must have been from a work conference months ago. But I remembered that conference, and it had been held at a hotel downtown, not in the suburbs. She got defensive when I pressed for details, accusing me of not trusting her during the most vulnerable time of her life. The guilt trip worked for a while. I threw myself into being the supportive husband, planning weekend getaways and cooking her favorite meals. But the doubts kept creeping in. She'd started going out more often, claiming she needed space to process her emotions. Girls' nights that lasted until 3 in the morning. Shopping trips that resulted in no purchases. Long walks in the park that took 4 hours. Each excuse seemed reasonable on its own, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Then I found the burner phone. It was hidden in a box of old textbooks in our storage closet, the kind of place you'd never look unless you were specifically searching for something. The phone had been used recently, with calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. Most of the text thread had been deleted, but a few fragments remained. Messages about missing someone and counting down days until they could be together again. The timestamps lined up perfectly with her supposed girls' nights and park walks. My world tilted off its axis. I sat in that closet for an hour, staring at the phone, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd grieved with, the woman I'd been supporting through what I thought was the worst tragedy of our lives, had been lying to me about everything. The miscarriage, the hospital visit, the recovery period, all of it had been an elaborate cover story for something else entirely. I couldn't confront her directly, not yet. I needed proof, something concrete that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as my imagination. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The decision felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about marriage and trust, but I was drowning in uncertainty and needed solid ground to stand on. The investigator was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She explained the process, the legal boundaries, the kind of evidence that would hold up if things went south. I felt sick the entire time, but I signed the contract and wrote the check. She promised to be discreet and thorough, and to provide me with answers within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were torture. I went through the motions of normal life, going to work, eating dinner with my wife, watching television together in the evenings. But every interaction felt like a performance. I found myself analyzing her every word, looking for tells or inconsistencies. She seemed different too, more distant, as if she could sense my suspicion even though I was trying to hide it. The investigator called me on a Thursday afternoon. She had photos, she said, and we needed to meet. I told my wife I was working late and drove to a coffee shop across town. The investigator had a thick folder filled with surveillance photos and detailed reports. My wife, it turned out, had been meeting with someone regularly for the past 4 months. The photos showed them at restaurants, walking hand in hand through shopping centers, and yes, entering and leaving that hotel where I'd found the keycard. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what the investigator had discovered about the supposed miscarriage. Using the hospital information my wife had given me, she'd done some digging and found that there was no record of my wife being treated at that hospital on the day she claimed to have lost the baby. No admission, no examination, no procedure scheduled. The whole thing had been fabricated. I felt like I was falling through space. The investigator kept talking, showing me more photos, more evidence, but I couldn't process it all. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd been planning to have children with, had faked a miscarriage to cover up an affair. She'd let me grieve for a baby that never existed while she was sneaking around with someone else. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The investigator suggested I might want to get legal advice before confronting my wife. She'd seen situations like this before, she said, and they could get complicated quickly. I thanked her, paid her fee, and drove home in a daze. My wife was in the kitchen making dinner, humming softly to herself. She looked up when I came in and smiled, asking about my day as if nothing had changed. I managed to mumble something about work being busy and excused myself to take a shower. Standing under the hot water, I tried to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to throw the photos on the table and demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part that had been methodically gathering evidence, knew I needed to be smart about this. If our marriage was over, and it certainly seemed like it was, I needed to protect myself legally and financially. I spent the next few days researching divorce attorneys and gathering our important documents. Bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies. I made copies of everything and stored them in a safe deposit box she didn't know about. I also started documenting her behavior, keeping a detailed log of her comings and goings, her lies and inconsistencies. If this was going to court, I wanted to be prepared. The attorney I consulted was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in complex divorce cases. She reviewed my evidence and explained my options. The fake miscarriage, she said, might be considered emotional abuse in some circumstances, but it would be hard to prove damages. The affair, on the other hand, was straightforward adultery, which could affect the division of assets depending on our state's laws. She recommended I continue gathering evidence for a few more weeks before making any moves. But I couldn't keep up the charade much longer. Living with someone who had betrayed me so completely was eating away at my soul. I was losing weight, losing sleep, losing my sense of who I was. Friends at work started asking if I was okay. My own family began expressing concern about my health. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming a ghost of myself. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. My wife announced she was going shopping with her sister and would be gone most of the day. I knew from the investigators' reports that her sister was actually out of town that weekend, visiting their parents. This was just another lie in an endless string of lies. After she left, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and realized I couldn't take another day of this deception. I called my attorney and told her I was ready to move forward. She arranged for my wife to be served with divorce papers at her workplace the following Monday. She also helped me prepare a detailed affidavit outlining the affair and the fake miscarriage, along with all the evidence I'd gathered. It was a thick document, methodically laying out the timeline of lies and betrayal. That weekend, I also did something I'd been putting off. I got tested for sexually transmitted diseases. The thought that my wife might have exposed me to something during her affair had been gnawing at me for weeks. Sitting in that clinic, waiting for the results, I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would go. At 32, I was supposed to be building a family, not dissolving a marriage built on lies. The test results came back clean, which was a relief, but it didn't diminish the sense of violation I felt. She'd risked my health along with everything else. She'd gambled with my body, my emotions, my future, all for whatever thrill she was getting from her affair. The selfishness of it was staggering. When she was served with the papers at work, she called me immediately, her voice shaking with rage and panic. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, threatened to fight me on everything, accused me of being paranoid and vindictive. I listened to her tirade calmly, then told her I had evidence of her affair and her fake miscarriage. The line went quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. She asked if we could talk when she got home. I told her I'd be staying at my brother's house for a while, and that she should communicate through attorneys from now on. She started crying then, begging me to give her a chance to explain, promising she could make things right. But I'd heard enough lies to last a lifetime. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. She initially tried to deny everything, claiming the photos were taken out of context and that the hospital records were wrong. But when faced with the overwhelming evidence, she eventually admitted to the affair. The fake miscarriage, she maintained, was a misunderstanding. She'd been scared and confused and had made a mistake about the dates. Her attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, someone who'd made poor choices but didn't deserve to lose everything. My attorney countered with the systematic nature of the deception, the emotional abuse, the calculated manipulation. In the end, the judge wasn't particularly sympathetic to her position. The settlement wasn't as favorable to her as it might have been if she'd been honest from the beginning. But the legal victory felt hollow. I'd won the battle but lost something fundamental about my ability to trust. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd planned to grow old with, had been living a double life for months. She'd cried fake tears over a fake tragedy while sneaking around with another man. The depth of the betrayal was something I'm still trying to process. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. People have affairs, marriages fall apart, these things happen. It was the fake miscarriage that really broke me. She'd taken something sacred, something that represented our future together, and turned it into a lie. She'd let me grieve for a child that never existed while she was off playing house with someone else. That level of cruelty was beyond anything I'd thought her capable of. In the months since the divorce was finalized, I've been trying to rebuild my life. I moved to a different part of the city, started going to a new gym, picked up hobbies I'd abandoned during our marriage. I've been dating again, cautiously, but I find myself looking for red flags everywhere. Every inconsistency, every unexplained absence, every phone call that goes unanswered triggers a wave of anxiety. My friends and family have been supportive, but I can see the concern in their eyes. They worry that I've become cynical, that I'm letting her betrayal poison my ability to love again. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am damaged goods now, too suspicious and guarded to ever fully trust another person. But I'd rather be alone than go through that kind of deception again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted her earlier, if I'd trusted my instincts instead of second-guessing myself. Would she have confessed? Would we have been able to work through it? But then I remember the fake miscarriage, the months of lies, the systematic manipulation. and I realized there was nothing to work through. You can't rebuild trust with someone who's capable of that level of deception. The other man, I learned during the divorce proceedings, was someone she'd worked with years ago. They'd reconnected at a conference and had been carrying on their affair for 6 months before I found out. He was married too, with kids of his own. I often wonder if his wife knows, if she's still living in the same blissful ignorance I was. Part of me wants to reach out to her, to save her from the same devastating discovery I went through. But my attorney advised against it, said it could complicate things legally. I've thought about writing him a letter, telling him what I think of men who destroy marriages and lie to their families. But what would be the point? He knows what he did. He knows the pain he caused. If he was capable of caring about that, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. Some people are just wired differently, I guess. Some people can compartmentalize their lives in ways that seem impossible to the rest of us. The hardest part of moving forward has been learning to trust my own judgment again. For months after I found out, I questioned everything. Had there been signs I missed? Was I naive or just willfully blind? I replayed conversations, analyzed interactions, looking for clues I should have picked up on. The truth is, she was good at lying. Really good. She had explanations for everything, reasonable-sounding stories that covered her tracks. If I hadn't found that burner phone, I might still be living in her web of deception. I've started working with a counselor, not because I think I need to be fixed, but because I want to understand how I ended up in that situation. What made me so trusting? What made me so eager to believe her explanations even when they didn't quite add up? I'm not trying to blame myself for her choices, but I do want to understand my own patterns so I can make better decisions in the future. One thing I've learned is that betrayal changes you at a cellular level. It rewires your brain, makes you hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats. I notice things now that I never would have paid attention to before. The way someone's story changes slightly each time they tell it. The way they guard their phone or get defensive when questioned. The way they create elaborate explanations for simple things. I'm not sure if this new awareness is a blessing or a curse. My brother thinks I should write a book about the experience, turn it into something that might help other people. He says there are probably thousands of men and women out there living with partners who are capable of this kind of deception, and maybe hearing my story would give them the courage to investigate their own suspicions. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of exposure, but I understand his point. The fake miscarriage aspect of the story seems to shock people the most. When I tell people what happened, they can wrap their heads around the affair, but the fake pregnancy loss leaves them speechless. It's such a violation of something sacred, something that should be off-limits even in the messiest of relationship conflicts. I've had women tell me they can't imagine using something like that as a lie. It's too cruel, too devastating. What I want people to understand is that this kind of betrayal isn't just about sex or romance. It's about psychological warfare. It's about someone you love using your deepest emotions against you. The fake miscarriage wasn't just a lie to cover up an affair. It was a weapon designed to make me more vulnerable, more dependent, more focused on taking care of her instead of paying attention to what she was really doing. I'm still angry about it, probably always will be. But I'm also grateful in a strange way. Grateful that I found out before we had actual children. Grateful that I discovered her true nature before I wasted any more years on someone who was capable of that level of deception. Grateful that I had the courage to investigate my suspicions instead of just accepting her explanations. The divorce is behind me now, but the lessons linger. I've learned to trust my instincts, to pay attention to inconsistencies, to ask questions when things don't add up. I've learned that some people are capable of maintaining elaborate lies for months or even years, and that love doesn't protect you from being deceived by someone you trust completely. I'm rebuilding my life one day at a time, one honest interaction at a time. I'm learning to love again, but I'm doing it with my eyes wide open. I'll never be that trusting again, that willing to accept explanations that don't quite make sense. Maybe that's a loss, but it's also a protection. I won't be fooled again, not like that. The hospital records I subpoenaed told a very different story than the one she'd given me. They told the story of a woman who was never pregnant, never grieving, never vulnerable. They told the story of someone who was capable of using the deepest human emotions as tools of deception. And ultimately, they told the story of a marriage that was built on a foundation of lies that could never support the weight of a real future together.